Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 876. The theory of constraints, a real-world tool, otherwise known as constraints and friction, are our friends. Constraints and friction generate interest in process improvement. Why does that matter? The lack of friction leads to overuse, which is the same thing as the tragedy of the commons. Things get overused until they collapse. Our panel today is Jeremy Barrio, Daniel Doron, and myself. Hey, remember, before we dive in here, Mastering Work Intake sponsors the Software Process and Measurement Cast. Buy a copy. You can get a copy on Amazon. Or go to J. Ross Publishing, our publisher. Starting everything means finishing nothing. It's your choice. Do something about it. Hey, we're recording this in, at the beginning of August in 2025. Guys, say hello. Let's go around the room, say hello. It's such a large crowd today.
Okay, so I'm Daniel Doiron. I'm from Montreal, and I'm the other Canadian on the show with Jeremy on the left, out west, Toronto. I'm in Montreal, and Jeremy's in Toronto.
There you go.
So, yeah, you took my introduction. So, yeah, Jeremy from Toronto.
Yes.
And today I'll just be the one that's faking it, eh?
All right, make it true Canadian content. There we go.
Well, there you go.
Well, he's not far from Canada,
no,
right?
I'm
Tom,
not.
You're not far from Canada, right?
No, I actually, I've spent a chunk of my career in places like Sherbrooke and Toronto, and for fun, when my wife and I tend to go to the big city, we tend to go to Toronto because it's drivable and we can get there. So, yeah,
well,
there you go.
Toronto's really the only city in Canada.
Oh.
Yes, of course.
Oh. I am rolling away from the microphone at this point.
But I'm not a Leafs fan, so that's okay.
All right, gentlemen, today, let's start this discussion because we have an expert here, and it isn't me. Let's start with the theory of constraints and see where we go with this. I think that it actually dovetails into a couple of different topics that we were discussing beforehand. Daniel, you are obviously the expert on the theory of constraints.
Knowledge.
And if nothing else, I'll make people get out and read your books because there's a lot in there. So tell us first what the theory of constraints is, where it came from, and your thoughts.
Well, actually, I think that everybody knows a bit about the theory of constraint. Basically, it says that in every system there is a constraint, and you've got to keep it busy at all time. And I was starting to do some work, actually, linking work intake, the topic that you know very well, and also linking this to wait time and touch time. Okay? And wait time and touch time are essentially also important in the theory of constraint because you don't want to spend your time in a wait state, right?
Correct.
And I came to the conclusion that work intake, the work that you did, is basically a strategy on wait time. Because wait time has to be managed outside of the system going in. Thought is as follows, is that wait time and WIP are linked together.
How?
Well, because the more wait time, the more WIP you have in the system, the more wait time you have, So it's Little's law at the basic, they're one for one. So if you want to diminish WIP in a system or wait time, which are both equal, you have got to have wait time strategies before the system.
Okay.
So if you overload the system, the throughput is always going to be the same, whether the system is overloaded or the system runs at normal capacity or the system has a lot of slack. The throughput is always theoretically going to be the same. Now, what happens is that as you manage your work intake and the wait time prior to work getting into the system, you are basically impacting the wait time inside the system, which is what you want. Because throughput will remain the same, but the service time will vary depending on the WIP that you have in the system. So, system overloaded, the throughput is the same, but the wait time in the system will make it so that you may spend a week in the system. If WIP is well organized, well synced with throughput, well, you may spend 2 days in the system. And if there is a lot of slack in the system, then it may take an hour to go through the system. I'm just speaking figuratively. And when there's a lot of slack in the system, it's like, to make an analogy, it's like your system is in a superhero state. You know, when you call Batman or Superman or Spider-Man, they're always ready. They always got slack, you know? And this is my superhero analogy when it comes to having a lot of slack in the system. It may seem like waste, but when there is an urgent or important request that is being asked for, then it will be serviced really quick. So my wait time strategy is something that has to be managed prior to entering the system. Okay, and of course, wait time is the easiest way to get process improvement because you kill the multitasking at the source, right? And you do that with the work intake. It's a subject that you have developed, and you wrote a book, and it inspired me to say that the wait time in the system has to be managed at the work intake phase. How do you feel about that? You having written a book on work intake?
I actually hadn't thought of it that way. I sitting here and I had jotted down, reached over and hey, you saw me look over. I was jotting down a little note to go back and actually re-listen to that so I can actually write some marketing copy for the book. But all in all, right? No, that makes sense, right? In essence, we're attempting to manage what gets there versus just letting the floodgates open. You know, arguably, right? Arguably, I like the analogy, the Superman, superhero analogy for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we, as process improvement people, we probably would say, you know, we don't want to have to rely on heroes, but in reality, we all probably know that there will always be the little kid that the building is collapsing on top of. And if you have no slack in the system, well, obviously Superman's not going to get there and you're going to have a grease spot on the street. It's the same as when, Jeremy, let's say Jeremy was my boss and he comes to me and says, we've got this incredible opportunity and we got to have it done by next week or we're going to be out of business. So obviously we have, I promised everything to everybody else, make it happen. I mean, if there's no slack in the system, there's no way to deal with that. Mr. Barry, how do you react to the premise that Daniel has put on the table?
Yeah, I was like, I didn't write any notes. I was concentrating really hard listening to Daniel talk, and I liked it. I liked the idea. And like Tom, yeah, I've read your book, and now I think I'm going to have to reread it based on what Daniel said. The throughput's going to be the throughput. Like that's it's no different than I think last time we talked. Daniel, you brought up, I forget the actual term for it, but the flow in a pipe, right?
So, yeah, laminar flow.
Yeah. So that flow is regardless of the pipe size, the flow is going to remain the same based on the pipe size, right? Or it's going to remain consistent. So same thing within the system. like whether you have Slack, that flow is still going to be there, but you want like the superhero analogy I like. And I think, Tom, to your point, you say it's like, yeah, we don't want to treat ourselves like we don't want to have like a hero on the team or a hero like that, like one person. But I see the team as being the collective hero, right? Like it's like they have to have the values and behaviors to take what's going on and try to and make it work as best as they can. And I'm glad. I don't know if I'm glad or happy that you use me as the boss that wants to throw a wrench in the plan for a particular sprint or what's going on. But I think I don't know about that because it's just the based on your book, something like that particular scenario, like that's like kind of a bad scenario to happen. Like I don't even know what business would get to that point where they automatically see an opportunity that if they don't deal with it within a week, they're gonna lose out. Like there's got to be some thing going on.
Well,
But
why?
the whole
Why? I actually think that, to be honest, the more I think about that, it would be nice, right? In normal stuff, in normal work.
Mhm.
Let's before we jump into that, let's go back to the idea of laminar flow. And I think it was John and Daniel that had the discussion in the previous podcast about laminar flow. Arguably, right? And so I'm currently, God knows when this will post, but I'm rereading A World Without Email by Cal Newport. And the idea of friction, the idea of having some disruption in the flow. So is laminar flow, perfect laminar flow, A, possible? And B, is it a good idea? And he is making the argument in email that because we've reduced the friction in the communication channel and obviously increased the pipeline too, so we've increased capacity and reduced friction to a level, it gets overused utterly and completely. So just if you look at the number of emails that you get in a day, it's mind-numbing. Some of them actually you have to read, others are just garbage. But the sheer amount of communication that you're dealing with on a team, whether it's email, Slack, Teams, whatever, is mind-numbing. It doesn't allow you ever to focus. And because there's no friction, there's very little push to make any process improvements. So to my mind, that almost argues, well, in the definition that Daniel gave us for the idea of the theory of constraints, it's the constraint. All systems, all processes have a constraint, right? Can we avoid having a constraint in the system at all?
No, something's going
Well,
to slow down somewhere.
yeah. Well, the thing is a constraint internal to the system or is a constraint in the market? And this and this is where things get really interesting and tangled a little bit. If my memory serves me correctly, and I may be wrong, but I think Ailey Schragenheim suggested to Mr. Goldratt that sometimes the constraint could be in the market. And Mr. Goldratt said, let me think about it. And basically, if the constraint is external, it's in the market, why do you need to be worried about your efficiency internally? Because you can produce as much as you want, cover your totally variable costs, and still manage to make money. However, when inventory piles up, then the constraint it could become internal, or the other way around. Basically, the market being the constraint is also something that has to be considered.
How would you recognize that? If the market was the constraint versus the process, how would you know that?
Well, the thing is, you're not being able to sell all of your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Will be a signal,
Okay.
right? And then the funny thing is, when the market is a constraint, it's internally your sales department is a constraint. So it's a double-edged sword, and this is where I am having difficulty. Even if the constraint is or is not in the market, I still consider that you have to be efficient internally.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
okay, but Daniel, based on with your example, you're saying, okay, the market constraint, like it's an issue with the sales department. Wouldn't that still be an internal constraint? Like, because if you can't sell, like if your stuff's not selling, is it an issue with sales? It could be an issue with sales, could be an
Yeah.
issue with marketing. So that's still internal. Like when I see a market constraint would be, let's overall, there's no like you want to build out a new feature, but there's no need for it, or there's no need for it yet, or you're trying to do something where the technology is just not there yet. So that's that constraint there. You're kind of tied to it.
Yeah. But
Like
that yeah. But that's what I'm saying. It's
yeah,
it's funny how it plays on the brain,
yeah.
you know,
Well,
because
and
still it remains internal. It's your sales department. But at the beginning, when people thought of a market constraint, they thought it would only apply to big, enormous firms like Coca-Cola or John Deere, where only them would be able to experience such a constraint
I'd like
because
to
they had a
suggest,
monopoly on the market. But now the shift, as the tide has turned, and now we're basically saying, oh, you have a constraint in the market if you have inventory on your shelves or not, unsold inventory on your shelves, or you're selling everything.
I'd like to put an example, just a slightly different example rather than manufacturing on the table for a second. I had this discussion with a firm a couple of years ago when I had some downtime, and the person called up, and I have a normal rate that I generally charge for training. And even when it's custom, it's a decent amount. The point that the person called up and was inquiring, and I don't know, maybe I was in one of those moods. I basically said, "Well, look, right now, I know we've done this before, but right now I have some inventory, and that inventory is time that I'm not billing, basically. So I'd like to sell that." So I basically discounted the rate for what I was doing for training for them to get the deal. I walked away from it before we signed because they wanted to negotiate even lower. So I'm not sure I'd ever say that again out loud. But we look at the market in Agile today. There are lots of Scrum Masters. There are lots of coaches. And there are a lot of people that have a lot of time inventory on their shelves. So the market collapse is a constraint on what they're able to sell. Is that a sales problem? Is that a marketing problem? Is that a pricing problem? How does one deal with it based on the theory of constraints?
like I did a pivot a few years ago because like from an agile coach perspective and scrum master, it was like most of us is like, oh, it's a tech team, it's a development team, or even if you like I worked with a marketing team a few years ago because they were starting to use Scrum. And I pivoted a little bit more into working with more smaller businesses and just like almost mom and pop shops. And yeah, you're obviously you're not going to charge like exorbitant amount of rate for them, but if you think about it, the size of the team, the size of the company, and the size of the business, it's relatively small. So from an hourly perspective, you can take on a few. And I took on a couple clients at the same time, and I was able to get the work done. Like one was a martial arts club, a jiu-jitsu club. Was a couple guys that I trained with before, and I helped them out with their school. And another one was just a like a nonprofit on helping them out and becoming better as a team. And I think, yeah, there is a downturn, I think, with agile coaches, like, and just trying to find work. But I think if we are truly agile and as truly just good agile coaches and good scrum masters, we should be able to pivot. And because we have the right mind, we have the framework, we have our values and our characters to use agility right, we should be able to, there should be no problem. I was able to do it. And I did it 5 years ago, like just before COVID started.
But is
And
this a market constraint or is this an internal to the organization constraint?
well, it's a market constraint if you look at it just straight from technology and where people think agile coaches and scrum masters usually do all their work. It's a constraint because it's overflowed with the market. Like for agile coaches, we have a lot of good coaches and we have a lot of bad coaches. And it's hard to differentiate between the two because there's just a boatload of us sitting around and trying to get the same type of jobs. So if we take a step back and remove the constraint and say, hey, I can help these three businesses in my local community still get the work done, why not? So you're just changing the pipe so you get a different
Yeah.
flow.
But at some point, you have to realize, are you at a red ocean market or a blue ocean market?
Yeah.
And when you're in a red ocean market, I mean, get the hell out of there. Okay, so that's why I think a lot of Scrum Masters and Agile coaches have now stepped into the project manager and portfolio manager market, and I think it's a way to sidestep this red ocean that we're in. As that's my opinion.
You're using
Because being in the red ocean market, like why get out of there?
So you're using a metaphor that people might not get, and I'm assuming they're talking about red tide and all those as it's sort of a deadly place to be. A red ocean?
Yeah, red ocean. There was a book written about this.
Yeah.
Okay,
5, 6, or 7, 8 years ago.
I didn't read that book, so and as you can see, I've read a lot of books. So help me
Yeah.
with the distinction between the two.
Well, Jeremy, did you read the book Red Ocean, Blue Ocean?
I've read a few articles about it. I didn't read the actual book, but I've read a few different articles and blogs about it. And really, the from a basic concept is a red ocean is one article I read is like it's just full of blood. The sharks are in the water. It's going to be hard to get anything done, get anywhere you want. Meanwhile, you go into a blue ocean, which is nice and calm. There's not a lot of stress. Easier to find work and get kind of where you want to go. That was it was interesting.
Yeah, well, you see, the agile certification market is in a red ocean now, and a lot of things related to agile and agile coaching, I think is in a red ocean state.
So that's a significant market constraint.
It is. It is. But how do you position yourself and make yourself distinguish? Well, I think Jira now has opened up the gate for CCPM, critical chain project management, which is the theory of constraints approach to project management. So it's opening up a new vein, a new path. But how can you exploit it? Is another story altogether. But when you're in a red ocean, it's pretty hard to because price, of course, becomes a discriminant factor.
Yeah.
But then everybody's bleeding, and you're just bleeding with them. And honestly, I don't know the answer to that
So, do you think this has anything to do with the fact that not only just to use the agile area, right? So we've had somewhat of a collapse in terms of the demand. We have a whole lot of supply, but a whole lot of that supply also is a lot of it has gray hair, and those are harder to place anyway. So is this sort of a unique, interesting storm at a time when a market's changed, you have a glut on the market, you have AI tools that purport to actually do some of that work, and the people that are doing it have an expectation of a relatively high salary. So is this sort of a perfect storm scenario of a whole lot of outside constraints? You knock one constraint down, there's always going to be another one behind it, right? Isn't that part of the theory of constraints?
Well, theory of constraints says that you have to identify that one constraint. But I think at times they cascade.
And then exploit it, right?
And you end up chasing them and basically you end up chasing them. It's like a falling knife. Maybe in 5-6 years we'll be able to identify what it is that we should have done. But now, like I said, it's like trying to catch a falling knife. I don't know what the answer would be.
Oh, you stick out your hand and let it go through it, and then that stops it. It just hurts a whole heck of a lot.
Well, but I see. Okay, but I don't think it's the certification. Yeah, there's a flood of different certificates out there. There's a lot of organizations that are exploiting people trying to get these certificates. I think it's more the constraint to me are the individuals that call themselves coaches but are not truly coaches. Like they're more kind of as Dean Peter said, hyper scrum mentalists, where they just like, oh, you're Scrum, where Scrum is the best thing on the planet, and this is what we're going to do. I think that's where the constraint is individuals that are like that, or have ethical issues, or you name it, like anything negative.
Yeah,
They're the constraint because they're the ones that are making everyone else look bad. Like they're trying to sneak into the market. They're getting into the market and trying to get that kind of get their foot in the door, take something away. And then when they mess up or something goes wrong, then word of mouth goes out saying it's like, oh God, don't do an agile transformation. We did one and it just doesn't work. And now you got pessimist bias going rampant because it didn't work before. Now they don't trust a good coach can come in and they're like, we don't trust you. And we're probably not going to do what you want. So you're constrained right from the start. And I think it's in people that are in that type of boat, the unethical, bad coaches, though they're the constraint. I don't think the certification is a constraint because PMP back in the 90s, you could throw a cat down the street and, let's just say you throw a rock down the street or stuffed animal. Let's not hurt any animals. You can throw a stuffed animal. You can throw a stuffed animal down the street and probably hit 5 people with a PMP. And it's still that didn't hurt anything from a project management perspective. I think because agility is coming.
Of course it did. That was why we had the birth of the Agile movement.
Well, yes, but then people still have
tried to break in a couple of times. Daniel.
Yeah. Well, I was saying, Jeremy, then how long does it take for you to be able to ascertain that a coach is good? Time then becomes a constraint because it takes, a good business analyst, it might take 6 months before you find out whether he or she is any good. And a sysadmin, it takes you, or a DBA, it takes you an hour, So a good coach, basically you need references, you need people that would vouch for that person or but people stepping in, a good coach, it can take you a long time before you find out whether that person is good or not. And this, you can't decipher if a coach is going to be good like within a day or two.
No, you can't, because there's so much. If things are south, or if things are south to the point where you need to bring in a coach, yes, you're not going to find out within a day or two whether you got that you got the coach that's going to save everything or help
Yeah.
save everything.
So then time is a constraint.
Yep.
And how do you nullify the time constraint is by having references
Mhm.
and a good references, tangible references that will
Yep.
say, oh, that guy was here for 3 years and this is what he did. And then you save that 6 or 7 months that will take you before you find out if he's any good, he or she is any good.
Mhm.
A road record.
So that would suggest that all of us with a longer pedigree should definitely have better time in the marketplace than all of those newly minted Scrum Masters or coaches.
Theoretically. But in practice, theory doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it is when you see agile coaches come out, it's like, oh, I'm an executive agile coach. And a lot of people say it. There's nothing wrong with it. The concerns I have and the issues I have is if you're calling yourself an executive coach, but you don't have maybe the education of what most executives go through, like an MBA or a BBA and like that, to understand that part, or you have not been a successful executive yourself, how can you be considered call yourself an executive coach if you have not gone into that?
Gentlemen, I don't know that we solve this, but we have actually taken an idea, a concept, the theory of constraints, originally highlighted by Goldratt in The Goal, and I think that was early 60s. I could reach.
No. Don't go there.
Don't go there.
No.
Okay, so
Tom, go with the expert.
No, it might be. I might stretching my neck out. I think it's. Maybe I should Google it, but I think it was 1984. Can you? Anyway.
Tom's looking for books. Let me go through. Let me see what Mr. Google says.
Yeah.
How do you know Google actually has a sex?
Okay, maybe it's Google. I don't know.
Well, Goldratt was born in 48, but that's you're right. No. Yeah, 1984. I'll be honest with you.
Wow.
Yeah, it was 1984. And the reason I read this book more than once in my career. I even invested in the graphic novel of Actually, that's not true. I didn't invest in it. It is actually pretty good. The Goldratt Institute actually asked me to review it. So I didn't. The feel of this book, again, so 84 theory constraints, the goal 84. So we've taken that, which again was originally written and talked about more from a manufacturing point of view, talked about it and applied it to, delivery of service, the idea of incorporating, which you're working on, and I'd love to see you have, great success with that and take that forward. Anything I can do to support you in terms of thinking about it through the lens of work intake, again, near and dear to my heart, I agree. But we have also applied the idea to a labor market. So, ideas like the theory of constraint isn't something that's taught in Scrum. It isn't necessarily something that's taught in or thought about by a lot of Agile practitioners. Is part of dealing with these kinds of items, right? The things that we're talking about, whether it's broadening the pipe, or introducing perhaps a little friction in it, whatever. Is that really part of incorporating things like lean and lean ideas and into the whole discussion of getting work done?
Well, you are a bit wrong in the sense, yes, because at the beginning, David Anderson and his Kanban movement, in the first years that he was, kicking the can around with this, was knee deep in the theory of constraint.
Okay.
He was knee deep. And then something, I don't remember exactly what, but something, because he said, oh yeah, I remember, because he was under the impression that to get things working with the theory of constraint, you had to have a big bang approach. But if you focus on the constraint, small changes can have a big impact. And this is where he sort of let it go. But there is a lot of constraint. There is a lot of theory of constraint material at the source of David Anderson's work. And he wrote 2 books entirely on the theory of constraint for knowledge work. Even the first one that was whose foreword was written by Mr. Schragenheim, who was the right arm at the time of Dr. Goldratt. I don't remember the title, but it's he right there with throughput accounting and theory of constraint for knowledge work. He wrote an entire book on that.
I'll have to dig that one up.
But then he sort of let go and went on his qualitative mode, of Kanban. And don't get me wrong, he does a good Kanban, and anything that's with Kanban is good. Okay, right off the start. But the David Anderson was knee deep in the theory of constraint at the beginning, and wrote an entire book on the theory of constraint, knowledge work, and throughput accounting.
Well, I stand corrected. And I'm good with being a little wrong. If I'm just a little wrong, well then, that's a good day. Because there are some days when I'm just really, really, really wrong. Excellent. Gentlemen, I think we have, again, and whether we're obviously we're not the first, but again, putting ideas together, I think, is really a way of seeing through and having an ability to actually solve real problems. Being, what was the term used about someone who's purely the scrumdimentalist-y kind of thing? What was the term you used, Mr. Barry?
Oh, from Dean Peters. Yeah, a hyper scrum mentalist, where they're just solely focused on scrum. Scrum is the thing.
Well, and that's also why our friend Susan Parente has a column that basically says, "I'm not a scrumdimentalist." So, again, we are hybridists, I think, by nature. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you for spending a very nice chunk of time talking about things that are near and dear to my heart. Obviously, there's some of us that I'm going to go do some more reading now. Go dig up my David Anderson books and start dealing again in those. I am not going to reread the entire body of Kanban body of knowledge. That's only 3 inches thick. I've only been through parts of that. So, but I will go and find his original books, which I have at least 2 of them somewhere in the room. Thank you again for spending your afternoon with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
It's always Tom. Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's always fun.
In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, work-life balance is dead. All caps, probably with an exclamation point, maybe even bold. Many firms are bringing everyone back to the office and demanding longer hours. They're conflating effort and productivity. This matters because increasing productivity is necessary for profitability and growth. But increasing effort doesn't mean getting more stuff done. It just means more emails or perhaps more meetings. And there's nothing in the world better than more meetings and more email. But process improvement is a never-ending journey. Why do so many people ask, are we there yet?